Parshas Boy, Tafshin Mem Gimel. It's the end of the Farbrengen, and the Rebbe brings down at the bottom of the page, right after the 3 stars, Islamet Gimel. It says, Yedu Asichas Kvedus Marichamia Admur, it's known, the talk of my father-in-law, in other words, the Friedrich Rebbe Baal Ha'ilula, the one whose yahrzeit is coming up, Yud Shvat, the next major Yom Tov, Oides Ma'aloson Shel Nashei Yisrael, about the great quality of Jewish women. Ukvishnisbar Gam Bekam His Damnias, like it was also explained on many occasions. Betur Hagdama L'Klosin the Matan Torah as an introduction to the general idea of the giving of the Torah. Tziva HaKadosh Baruch Hu Moshe Rabbeinu, Hashem commanded Moshe Rabbeinu, Koi Soimer L'Beis Yaakov V'Sagi L'Bnei Yisrael. So you shall say to the house of Yaakov, and you should speak to the sons of Yisrael. Pirish Rashi, like Rashi explains, L'Beis Yaakov, who is the house of Yaakov? In other words, who runs the home? Elah Anoshim, this is talking about the women. V'rak achar kach, and only afterwards, V'sagi L'Bnei Yisrael, shall tell and speak to the Bnei Yisrael, to the sons of Yisrael. La'anoshim, to the men. So this is what this teaches us. First and foremost, the command was to speak with the Jewish women, because they will already influence and bring this about that the men should do what they're supposed to do. That's one point that the Friedrich Rebbe says in the Sikh. And the Friedrich Rebbe continues in the above mentioned Sicham, we find in a similar vein concerning the donation that the women gave for the Mishkan. When the Jewish people donated all their different items for the making of the Mishkan, that the men came upon the women, in addition to the women, like it says in parts of Vayakel, Lamed Hey, Chav Beis. What does that mean? So right away, Rashi explains, Im hanoshim v'smuchim aleihem. They were with the women, and they were like auxiliary to the women. And I don't know how many of you remember this idea of, there was always like in different shulim, something called the ladies' auxiliary. But in this case, when it came to donate for the Mishkan, it wasn't the ladies' auxiliary. It just the opposite. The men were considered an auxiliary to the women because the women were the ones that did the main part of the donating before the women. Before the men. This means to say, first and foremost, the women donated to the Mishkan. And only afterwards, the men had brought their donations. In a similar vein, we find when there was an occasion to donate for something untoward, the Rebbe doesn't want to mention it by name, but he's referring to the Cheta Egel, that the Jewish women did not want to donate their jewelry for it. The men were the ones that donated, and the women did not wish to do so. So we find, again, this type of idea of the women always having the first and greatest priorities front and center. To such a degree do we find the importance of the women. It says in the merit of the righteous women of that generation, our forefathers were redeemed from Egypt. This means to say, the redemption of Klal Yisrael, including even the heads of your tribes, even the most greatest of people who affected their redemption. It was by the merit of the Jewish women. So now we talk about all the past. What happened by Yetzias Mitzrayim, what happened by the Mishkan, what happened by Matan Torah. But what does this have to do with now? So the Rebbe brings in the basic thing that everything in the past that's written in the Torah. Torah is everlasting. So everything that's written in the past in the Torah is something that applies now as well. All of the advantages of women, of Jewish women that said earlier, it's everlasting in all the generations, just like all matters of Torah which are everlasting. Ubefrat, this is even especially so, since we find the Jewish women's advantage connected with something that's everlasting. When we find the advantage of Jewish women concerning the donation of the Mishkan, that it exists in an everlasting fashion. The way the women, the fact that the women gave for the Mishkan, so that means their work has an everlasting advantage. Why? Chazal say, Mishkan v'kelef, Maisi de Moshe nignezum. It says that the Mishkan and its vessels, which were all made by the hands of Moshe, meaning by his direction and so on, they were hidden away. In other words, they were never destroyed. It's not like the first and second Beis Hamikdash that they were destroyed. Maisi de Moshe nitzchim, the Chazal say. The actions, the work of the hands of Moshe are everlasting. So in other words, they actually exist. They are up till now existing, and they will become fully revealed when Moshiach comes. So therefore, that means that also the women's contribution in making the Mishkan is also practically and literally and physically in our world everlasting. So this is true for all generations, the women's importance and how it matters in all of these things, because Torah is everlasting. Even more so, this is something that we see in our generation especially. And especially this matter about the special advantage of the women is emphasized in our generation. According to what it's explained in the Arizal's writings. The final generation of exile, that's the first generation of the future redemption. Our generation, the Rebbe says, brought from the Arizal, is a Gilgul. We are recycled neshamas of that generation that went out of Mitzrayim. Therefore, what happened then is happening now as well. In other words, the special advantage of women then has a special effect and importance now, more so than the fact that Torah is everlasting and it has to do in all time. Therefore, just like the redemption of Mitzrayim was by the merit of the righteous women of that generation, in the year 2448, so too the future redemption will be in the merit of Jewish women that's in our generation. Like we spoke about many times, we don't have to bring proofs that this generation is the final generation of exile. Automatically, therefore, if you know it's the final generation of the exile, it must be the first generation of the future redemption. The reason for it that specifically this generation is the one that will merit the future redemption, since it's similar to a midget that's standing on the shoulders of a giant. This means to say, though our generation might be considered a midget in our merits and our spiritual levels in comparison to much greater generations that preceded us. When the giant places this midget upon his shoulder, now the midget can see further than the giant can see, which is really a big chiddush. That the giant could bring up the nanos, could bring up the midget to his level, that's one chiddush. But here it's something even greater, that the nanos is able to now perceive, because he's standing on top of the giant's shoulders, even more than a giant is able to perceive. And what's the benefit of it? Now the midget directs the giant and is teaching the giant. Then the midget tells the giant that he's seeing that here Moshiach is on his way. Therefore the midget is telling the giant, and let us go and dance towards Mashiach. In other words, our generation, as low and as insignificant as we are in comparison to previous generations, we can invite and tell all the other generations that we see things that they are incapable of seeing, that Mashiach has actually come. Lamed Hey, now the Rebbe, as usual, wants to bring things in a practical thing, in a practical approach. What is it about the Jewish women that contributes to Mashiach? So he says in Lamed Hey, the effect and the influence of the Jewish women in that generation, that went out of Mitzrayim, it expresses itself in the fact that they raised up the hosts of Hashem, the armies of Hashem, practically, physically. They had this bonus through giving birth to boys and girls, be Yisrael amongst Yidden. The Jewish people were fruitful and they increased and they became very mighty, very, very much so. Vav l'shoinus, the fact that the pasuk uses 6 expressions of paru is 1, vayishitzu 2, vayirbu is 3, vayatzmu is 4, b'ma'oid twice is 6. So the 6 l'shoinus hints ukepirish Rashi shoya yoldus shisha bekeres echad. They would give birth to sextuplets, 6 at once. Rashi im pshuta shel mikra. Rashi is usually not into medrash unless it's necessary to understand pshuta shel mikra. The fact that the pasuk uses such an over-the-top type of expression of how the Jewish children increased in Mitzrayim, using 6 expressions, Rashi derives from that and teaches us, even for a ben chamish l'mikra, to know that there were sextuplets born. And all of this without becoming influenced by the difficulty of the Geulah, that they would encourage their husbands as well, who came home exhausted and came home tired and perhaps weren't interested, and they were perhaps also saying, how are we going to be able to support kids? Still in all, they said, this is what we have to do. And they were the ones that in their merit, because of their attitude, we merited to go out of Mitzrayim. So the Rebbe says, in a practical sense, this applies by us as well. Movement again, in a similar vein, it's understood concerning this generation. Through the effort of Jewish women and fulfilling the mitzvah of being fruitful and multiplying without any types of calculations of the Rebbe used to speak about the negativity of family planning and so on. Hashem plans for us. We don't have to be the ones to plan and figure out how we're going to support them and so on. So then Mamidim Tzivus Hashem. Then they establish and raise up the hosts of Hashem, the army of Hashem. By days and through establishing the army of Hashem, they make close and they speed up the future redemption of Bias Mashiach Tzidkenu, the coming of Mashiach. K'mayim Razal the Chazal say in Gemara Yevamis, Ein ben David Bo, Ad sheyichlu kol neshamas shebeguf. The son of David, meaning Chazal's terminology for Mashiach, is not coming until all the souls of the body will cease. What's the meaning of the body? So Rashi explains, there's a treasure house of neshamas above, a storage house of neshamas above that's called by the name Guf, and only when all of those neshamas empty out of those treasure houses and come down here below, that's when Mashiach comes down. So in other words, every Jewish child that is born, through the influence of Jewish women, through the self-sacrifice of Jewish women, brings about the coming of Mashiach closer. All of this has to be out of joy and gladness of heart. The Rebbe, a lot of times, when he gives us directives, he says, you could do it, just B'Kabbalas oil. What do the Rebbe told me to, Shulchan Aruch tells me to, whatever, I got to do this. I have no other choice. So the Rebbe says, no, this must be done in a way of joy and gladness of heart. Like all matters of Torah and its mitzvahs, has to be done with joy. Like it says, serve Hashem with joy, the same thing. The idea that I'm bringing children into this world so that Mashiach should come should be done out of joy. How much more so when we're speaking about the idea of about the idea of giving birth to sons and daughters, that has even more of a reason to be joyous than other types of mitzvahs. Even though every mitzvah we do has to be done out of joy, but especially when it comes to the mitzvah of bringing children into this world, this has even a greater reason for joy. Because when we bring children in the world, through bringing children into the world, it's affected the revelation of the infinite power of Hashem in this physical world. The physical world is limited. By giving birth to children, we are bringing down and expressing Hashem's infinite power in the limited, powerless world. Because procreation has in it a power of infinity. Because I give birth to children, and those children give birth to other children, their children give birth further. So therefore, when I am giving birth, I am bringing down the power of the infinite into this world. And that's a cause for simcha. That's why explained in a Maimer of the Rebbe Rashab, in a series of Maimer of the Rebbe Rashab, this is the reason for the great joy by a wedding. Because by a wedding, there is a revelation of the power of the Ein Sof. And therefore, how much more so is there a reason to be besimcha from fulfilling this directive of bringing as many children into the world as possible? That's one reason why the person is filled with simcha when fulfilling this mission of bringing children into the world. How much more so when we know that through bringing children into this world, we are bringing the Geulah closer. So it's another reason how much more so is it such a great and wonderful thing like bringing the Geulah has to be done out of joy and gladness of heart. So the Rebbe says 3 reasons why bringing children into the world has to be done out of joy. 1, it's a mitzvah like any other mitzvah, and you have to serve Hashem with simcha. 2, because it manifests the power of the Ein Sof in the world, which is a cause for joy. And 3, because bringing closer to Geulah. So what could be a more joyous occasion than that? By Dezeh, and through being involved in bringing more children into this world, we merit to establish an army of Hashem, sons and daughters, bnei banim ubnois banis, sons of sons and daughters of daughters, ad soif kol ha'olam, until the end of all time. That's a simple meaning of Soif Kol Ha'olam, the end of the world, meaning that it keeps on going and going and going as long as the world exists. And the Rebbe says there's another meaning, a deeper meaning in Soif Kol Ha'olam, שבזן נכלל גם הפירוש שמבטלים ועושים סוף לכלולת ההלם וההסתר דמציאות העולם, that by establishing and giving birth to children to the end of Olam, that means that we are nullifying and we're making an end to the idea of Olam from the word concealment and covering. That the concealment and covering of the world ceases through our establishing and bringing about children and their children and so on and so forth. The cholza and all of this that we are putting a stop to the concealment of the world is kasher nimtzoim adayim b'soif zman hagolus. This is already when we're found at the end of the time of Golus. It doesn't even have to be when Moshiach comes that the concealment of the world stops, because we find on occasion that this took place already by Mitzrayim. Mitzrayim, like was in Golus Mitzrayim. That we're going to learn in this week's parsha, that during the plague of darkness, it says that for all the Yidden was light in their settlements, while they were still in the land of Mitzrayim, like the simple meaning of the psukim. So in a similar vein, just like by the Yidden of Mitzrayim then, there was light for all the Yidden despite the darkness around them, so too we are lighting up and we are putting an end to the concealment of the world through establishing generations of Jewish children, sons and daughters and grandsons and granddaughters. The Inyan Zeh, third paragraph from the top, this idea that there is light in their settlements. It's affected through the general avoid of Yidden in matters of Torah mitzvahs. And through a person refining his lot in the world, his portion of the world. Every Yid engages with a certain part of the world that they need to elevate. So that causes and brings about the light in their settlements. Koilo, this influence on their part in the world includes also the influence and the effect upon the nations of the world. They should fulfill the 7 mitzvahs of the children of Noach. Through that is affected the idea that there should be light in their settlements, in the person's own part of the world that they are engaged in. And when every Yid is bringing light into their own portion of the world that they're engaged in, so then, when we combine the avoid of all Yidden, that each one is bringing light in their particular corner of the world, through that we bring light ba'olam kula in the entire world. Oislamed Vav, 4th paragraph from the top. Through the general avoid of the Yidden in the time of exile, the Yidden merit to leave Golus with great wealth. What is the great wealth going on? So we know from many places that Rebbe emphasized the great wealth is talking about the many sparks of holiness that were embedded in Mitzrayim. The koi al kol netzoytzes hakdusha shemevarim bnei Yisrael b'zman hagolus. It's referring to all the sparks of holiness that not just in the time of Mitzrayim, but also now, that Yidden refine and elevate during the time of exile. Like previously in the Farbrengen, in the Maimer that the Rebbe recited, it was explained, that's what it says, this very day, all the hosts of Havaya went out. So, the simple meaning of the pasuk, all the hosts of Havaya, is talking about the Bnei Yisrael. But hosts could also be things that escort Havaya, which means the sparks. Shetzivus Havaya koi al bechinas hanitzoitzim shenizbaru begols Mitzrayim nisal lekol v'shem Havaya. It's referring to the sparks that were refined by the exile in Mitzrayim, and they ascended to become part of Shem Yud Kei Vav Kei. That's why they're considered the Tzivos Havai, the hosts of Hashem, the ones that accompany Shem Yud Kei Vav Kei. Through the sparks that were elevated from Mitzrayim, Nifala Inyan the Hoitz Hashem Bnei Yisrael Al Tzivoisam. It was affected where it says at the end of our parsha also that Hashem took out the Bnei Yisrael upon their hosts. What does that mean? We said that there's the sparks of godliness that were embedded in Mitzrayim that Yidden elevated, and now the Yidden reached a level even higher than those sparks. This means Yisrael. And now the Jewish souls are even higher than these above-mentioned sparks that they elevated. This means to say, the Rebbe says, that the Eden are higher than the sparks of holiness, the way the sparks of holiness were before they were refined. So that, the Micah Mashvalon, who has to, there's no reason for the Pasuk to tell us that. It's obvious. Obviously, the Eden are higher than the sparks before they were elevated. But the point that the Pasuk is trying to tell us is, they are higher than the sparks of holiness, the way they follow the refinement. After they're becoming part of Shem Yud Kei Vav Kei, after they became the hosts of Avaya. And still then, it's Al Tzivoisam. Even then, the Yidden are upon the hosts, upon and higher than these sparks of Kedusha. That's a general idea of the descent for the sake of an ascent. Through the descent of exile, on the tzaitis and refining the sparks, the Bnei Yisrael arise to a much higher level than they were before they descended. They are now al tzivoisam. They are now even higher than these sparks that they elevated. Very soon becomes affected what it says that it was when Pari sent out the nation. Again, it's a Shabbos Farbrengen, Parshas Bo. So on Mincha, they're going to read Parshas B'Shalach. So this should be affected also also in relationship with our exile. Kiloimars means to say, that Pari himself, Golus itself, Klippa itself, sends the Yidden out of Golus. Like Chassidus explains, that's also brought down in a Maimer of the Rebbe Marash of the year Tafresh Chav Zayin, Shebeshon Zu Malu Mea Shon Listalkas Ilulu Shaloi. This was a Sikha that Rebbe said in Tafshin Mem Gimel, 1983. This was 100 years since the passing of the Rebbe Marash in 1883. So the Rebbe Marash says in a Maimer on Parsh B'Shalach, Shepari Ha'im Pe'eres Va'anofim, Pari would send out shoots and branches, Va'oisepri L'mayla Sa'am, and he made fruits to elevate the nation. What does that mean? That's what he explained, B'Shalach Pari, like a tree that sends out these shoots. This means to say, Shaite Klolos, in Hagolos, through the general idea of exile, Golos, Mitzrayim, the exile of Mitzrayim, Nifal Birra Netzoitis is affected, the refinement of the sparks. Va'aliyas Bnei Yisrael Dargan Niles Yoser, and the ascent of the Yidden to a much higher level than they were before they descended into Golos. Kanal V'Pirish Al Tzivoisam, like we explained earlier, in the meaning of what it says, upon their host, meaning even higher than these sparks that were elevated. Before become Mekaimis, like it's explained in many places, skip the parentheses. Sheklolos Inyan Golos Ubedugmis Inyan Hazriya. The general idea of Golos is similar to being planted. It says that I planted it for me in the ground. Like the Gemara says, a person plants a certain small amount to be able to have the produce much more. The same thing, we are planted in Golos, so if you're able to have the produce that we bring forth so much greater than what we were before we were planted in Golos. Since this matter is brought down, the Maimer, the Rebbe Marash, moving it's understood. The matter is affected in the way of to go over initially. Because this is the idea, what the Rebbe Marash is about, is that from already from the beginning to go over without any type of obstacles. Like we said before, that we merit this very soon, mamish, in such a way that you didn't go out with a raised up hand, with our youth and our elderly, with our sons and our daughters, the perfection, the completion of the nation, along with the complete Torah and the complete land, in a way that behold with the clouds of heaven, like a cloud, they're flying, and like doves back to their dovecotes from mamish, speedily nowadays mamish. And then he says that the Rebbe concludes that the Rebbe sang the nign Chatchila Riber, and he sang the nign of Simchas Torah, and then after Mincha he sang Shiban Beis Midrim Herim Mamish.